if you could just kind of start out by telling me who you are and how long you've been in real estate and where you're at.
Okay. My name is CJ Garrett Roth, and I own my own brokerage called Low Country Charmed in Charleston, South Carolina. And I've been a agent for 17 years. And I'm actually in Mount Pleasant, which is a suburb of Charleston, but we have 3 counties in our area, and I service all 3.
So the email that you responded to was mainly about inherited homes. And what kind of experience do you have in that niche?
Well, I used to be a financial planner, so some of that is from people that were actually clients for their parents, or I had some people die. So I was the person that they picked because I also had my real estate license. And then referrals from other companies that I worked real closely with property management company. And so I would do that for them because I understood the probate process a little bit more than the average agent, knowing what you needed to do if it was court ordered, what a personal representative, we have personal representatives here, needed to do, and what had to be done so that you could, pass clear title.
The ones that you got referred to from the other companies, were those relationships that you had made with those companies prior to receiving those listings?
Yes, they were. But I actually had a brokerage at the time, and I sold my brokerage to another company, and part of it was real estate and the other part was property management. Mm-hmm. So I did that, and I didn't ever really go out and look for the business. Mm-hmm. It's a very emotional business, so it was not something that I just felt comfortable just trying to, go out and do. But I did have a couple attorneys that had, there was properties that were being rented. And, once that owner passed away, the heirs wanted to sell. So they reached out to the property management company. They referred to me.
Right. And I guess with those, having the property management company and knowing those attorneys, I get just showing that you have that knowledge base and can help their client is definitely a big plus for them to have.
Yes, very much so. Just having experienced it and gone through it, with somebody before.
Right. And a lot of people I've talked to said, the attorneys, it's one less thing for them to have to deal with if they have somebody like yourself that can come in and understand the process.
Right. They really don't want to work with somebody who doesn't know what happens, because there's so many dates that you have to meet, and, starting with the process, and then being able, depending on how the estate is structured, how many people have to sign off. And of course, I live in the South, so there's a lot of heirs property around here. So you have to understand that mix. I mean, the longest it took me to sell something was almost a year from the time we got a contract until we could actually sell it, because we had to go back to all the heirs. I actually had to go to Columbia and get the death certificate for anything to be able even to go forth, physically go get it, because they had let it expire too long to be able to be mailed to them.
That part of, this niche is very interesting. It's one of those that I think if you're not ready for it, it's probably something that you should really understand before you get into, is
Absolutely.
all the extra stuff. What advice would you give to somebody that is looking to get into it?
Well, first of all, I would probably tell them to look around and see if they can find somebody, an attorney that deals with probate, see if they can sit down with them, because every state has a different way of doing it. So, what we do in South Carolina may not be the same thing as you do in Florida. So for me, just knowing that, and I had already kind of experienced that when I was a financial planner and I had to go through probate with people. So I had a lot of knowledge, but I had a lot of relationships with attorneys too for financial planning. So for me, it was probably a little bit, I got the education without really pursuing it. Out of necessity, which is probably not the best way to do it, but
It worked though. In your experience with some of the instances, some of the listings that you had, what were some of the issues that came up? I know you said like with the errors. I know it's up.
Yeah. So, well, the hardest property I ever, sold was a situation where the the husband had passed, and the wife had moved in with her sister in a completely another state. They were letting a family member live there, and then the family member moved out, and they decided to sell it. Well, they had not registered. They did not go through probate. They just didn't go through probate. They didn't file any of the paperwork they were supposed to change the ownership from her husband to herself. And she had every right to do that. But I think here you've got a 7-year period to do that, and this was 10 years after. So I actually had to go and get the death certificate from the Capitol up at Human Services in Columbia, South Carolina, so that the attorney could have the proof. And then first thing we had to do is to prove that she was the rightful heir. So then she had to go back and get all of his relatives to sign off saying they did not have a claim to the property. So it took quite a while.
And especially if it's a family home that the children have grew up in, how do you handle that whole idea that their value on the home is not necessarily matched up with market value for the home?
Well, in a perfect world, they're supposed to get that home appraised. So that's not necessarily always happens. So I've actually had to go back and try to appraise the value of death and the value of 6 months after for, federal taxes. If they don't have a will, that's the other process. Like the one I was talking about, he died intestate, no will. So, they have provisions for that. And that's why it took so long to get the title cleared for that. Like I said, it's you show them comps, and I mean that's just the reality of it. If they didn't get it appraised at the time of death, we have choice here in South Carolina, which I think is every place because it's a federal thing. So you can either get it appraised at the time of death, or 6 months later you can pick the value that you want. Whatever is higher or lower, depending on what you're going to be doing to dispose of the home or whatever.
Right. Have you run into too many situations where you have part of the family wants to hang on to the home and the other part is ready to get rid of it?
Not so much that. Most of the time, when they've made a decision to sell, they're pretty much on board with it. I did have one situation where it was the owner hadn't passed yet. She was going into a home, and there was 3 sisters, and one of the sisters just did not want to sell the home at all. And so we went through the whole process, and finally, we did put the home up, and her mom died before we even got the house sold. So that was the biggest challenge.
When you go and you're on your initial meeting with a prospective client in this situation, how do you handle, what's the initial meeting? How is that different from another listing appointment that you might go on?
Well, my first meeting is usually by telephone. I need to get the information together. I kind of need to know the lay of the land, talk to the people. I really have to take more of an advisory approach rather than a sales approach. And then when I finally meet, I had people I have never met with. They lived in other states, and that's very, very common that you never even get to meet any of them. And a lot of them are older. They aren't into Zoom. So a lot of it is through, the telephone, conference calls with them, the attorney, and myself, just kind of, letting them know the process. So, I certainly can let them know the process, but I'm not an attorney. So what I usually like to do is to get the attorney that's going to represent the estate to have a conference call. So he's the authority on that portion of it. So he'll go through the process and say, okay, here's the first thing that we have to do. This is what we need to happen. Then when we get an offer, this is the next thing. And then I take over. Okay, here's the process of selling it. And then he says, okay, now it's my turn to take over again to disperse the funds. So you really need to have that relationship with the attorney for the estate. And when I talk to somebody initially, I kind of find out if they have one. If they don't, then I'll have somebody work with them. And then, that's basically how I've handled it. And it's not, people aren't really into looking at a whole bunch of comps and everything else. I've had people say, well, if I can't sell it for this, I don't want to sell it, and I'll show them, okay, well, basically, here's the deal. Would you want to hold on to it for 2 more years? Because you're looking at where we are now, and you look at how fast the market has increased to get your price. We're going to have to wait 2 to 3 more years to even see that acceleration in the market. And once they see that, they really want their money as quickly as possible. So that's how I've dealt with the logic portion of it.
Right. Right. That was interesting. You talked about the, so you have, what we've been talking with other people is about trying to get attorneys to refer you, but you almost have attorneys that you refer to agents. So it's that kind of give and take with you and the attorneys.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There'll be some times where they'll call me, or they'll have someone get in touch with me, or I'll get in touch with them. It depends on the situation.
Right. And that really helps out down the future, for future deals, what comes up.
Yeah, it does. Having a good relationship with attorneys is really what it's all about, because it's very difficult when someone's in an emotional state to be the authority when you're selling the thing that they're tied to emotionally. So having that extra person in there to be that, authority for you is a much easier process.
Yeah, definitely. Before we wrap up, just what other advice would you give to agents that are looking to get into a niche like the inherited, and even, some of these more emotionally driven, ones that have maybe some emotion behind them?
Yeah. So the first thing I would tell them is to go to their county website, to the probate, because a lot of times they'll have information on there on how things are handled in your state and particularly in your county. And they can get a lot of information there on how the actual process is. And once they have that, then they'll know the right questions. And then I would call a couple of probate, attorneys and, tell them that, I'm looking to do this as a business. And, I'd like to create this relationship so that if I run across somebody and they don't have someone, I can refer them to you. And likewise, you can refer them to me, and I would try to pre-educate before you even start calling attorneys, because typically attorneys really do not want to teach you. They just want you to know. So, but if you know enough to ask the right questions, then you can come off as, knowing a lot more than you actually do and get some answers.
Right. And I think, and that being able to, when you do reach out to these attorneys, showing that you offer something that takes a burden off of their plate is a huge help.
Absolutely. It's much easier for them if you have somebody who knows what they're doing, because then they're not telling the wrong thing and then they have to go back and correct it and say, no, that was wrong, so that's really important. I had a couple of situations with that. Some other agents that were saying, well, you have to do this, this, and that. It's like, no, you don't, but you're not going to hear that from me. I just have the attorney tell you, like for buyer's agents. Yeah.